Ethan had just finished his night shift when he stepped out of his car and froze. In the middle of the front yard stood a red and white for sale sign, swaying in the wind like it was mocking him. Before he could even process what he was seeing, a car pulled into the driveway. Marissa stepped out, her suitcase still dangling a weekend retreat tag, the bright expression on her face hardening in an instant. She shouted, asking if he had lost his mind, demanding to know who gave him permission to sell the house. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked at her the way one looks at a stranger, then spoke slowly and evenly, saying he had not done it on his own, that the court had already signed off, and that the house was being sold because they were divorced. The color drained from her face. She stood there, stunned, unable to form a word, and at that exact moment, Ethan's phone vibrated in his hand. A new message appeared on the screen, saying they had posted photos from the company dinner, that Logan had laughed in front of everyone and asked, "How does it feel?" Ethan closed his eyes. He knew then that what had just happened in the driveway was only the beginning. The real game had finally started. The for sale sign stood planted in the middle of the front yard, leaning slightly in the wind like a verdict already passed. When Marissa stepped out of the car, the suitcase still dragging behind her, that sign was the first thing she saw. Not the familiar house she thought she was coming home to, but an ending swaying openly in front of her eyes. Inside the living room, Ethan stood with a book in his hands, the pages open but unread. He heard the front door slam hard enough to rattle the frame, heard Marissa's breath come sharp and uneven as anger carried her down the hallway. Her heels struck the floor like a countdown. She shouted his name, demanded to know who gave him the right to sell the house, asked if he had finally lost his mind. Ethan slowly closed the book and looked up. His gaze was calm to the point of being cold. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush his words. He said he had not done it alone, that the court had signed the order, that the house was being sold because they were divorced. In that moment, the color drained from Marissa's face. The fury froze, replaced by pure disbelief. She could not understand how her life had just slipped off the path she thought she controlled. She did not yet know that this story had not begun today. Before the sign appeared, Ethan Caldwell was the kind of man people overlooked. 41 years old, lean and weathered from years of field work. He managed infrastructure inspections for the city of Raleigh. His job was to stand under bridges and along highways, measuring cracks and load limits, deciding whether concrete and steel could still be trusted. He spoke little. He attended no flashy events. He believed in routines, in responsibility, in showing up. To him, family was like a structure. If it was built right, it could carry weight. Marissa was everything he was not. 43, polished, confident, a senior manager at a high-end furniture showroom. When she entered a room, attention shifted toward her. She knew how to speak, when to smile, how to make people feel chosen. Friends told Ethan he had married up. He believed them. He believed they were a team. Him laying foundations, her decorating the surface. Their house north of Raleigh had green grass, bright windows, friendly neighbors. Marissa's daughter Jade, from a previous marriage, visited now and then, dropped laundry in the washer, complained about school, laughed at the table. From the outside, it looked like a solid family story, warm enough that no one asked deeper questions. But a marriage is not just walls and a roof. It is the people living inside them, and some cracks do not make a sound. It started with Marissa's trips. She called them girls' weekends, retreats, spa escapes, digital detoxes. She asked permission lightly, with a smile, and Ethan gave it just as easily. He did not want to be the jealous husband. He had seen relationship stories collapse under suspicion. He chose trust. Then the preparation changed. New clothes, stronger perfume, hair done too carefully for hiking trails. She said she was going to unplug, yet packed like someone expecting to be seen. When Ethan asked casually, she laughed it off and told him he was overthinking. The smile slid across him without warmth. When she came home, the stories were shorter. Shopping, wine, the girls. That was all. Gone were the detailed anecdotes she once loved telling. The small moments she used to fill the silence at dinner. Ethan listened and nodded, but inside his chest, Something pressed against bone. One evening, Jade made an offhand comment, half joking, half unsure, that her mother seemed unusually happy lately. She watched Ethan's face, waiting. He smiled and changed the subject. He believed he was doing the right thing. Late one night, Ethan sat alone in the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. He thought about how Marissa once told a 20-minute story about customers arguing over a chair. She loved details, yet an entire weekend now came back empty. Just a void. Outside, the wind moved through the for sale sign. Marissa did not understand yet. She did not know that Ethan was not impulsive. He did not shout. He did not break things. He built plans the way he built bridges. Step by step, by the book, and when a bridge was finished, it did not collapse. It carried him to the other side. Before anyone judges the sign in the yard, they need to know this. That sign was not the first move. It was the result, and the real story of betrayal had only just begun. That night, Ethan realized that some lies do not need to be caught in the act. They begin to rot quietly in the silence. Marissa came home later than usual, carrying with her the scent of unfamiliar perfume mixed with the cool night air. She set her bag down, brushed a quick kiss across Ethan's cheek, then walked straight into the bathroom as if everything were normal. Ethan stayed where he was, listening to the water run, listening to his own breathing tighten. In that moment, he understood that betrayal does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply takes up space. The girls' weekends became more frequent. Marissa's once predictable schedule suddenly opened with gaps. She called them retreats, spa trips, detoxes. Ethan nodded, the same nod of a man who believed control was a weakness. He told himself he was not suspicious. He was a builder. He trusted numbers, structure, and load limits, and marriage, to him, deserved the same trust. But the data began to contradict the story. Marissa prepared for these trips like she was dressing for an audience. New dresses, new shoes, hair styled down to the smallest detail. She said she was going into nature, yet packed like someone meant to be seen. When Ethan asked casually, she smiled and said he was imagining things. That smile slid across him, cold. She returned from each trip with answers stripped down to the bare minimum. Shopping, wine, the girls, nothing more. No lost trail stories, no jokes about awkward moments, no complaints about service. This was the same woman who once spent half an hour describing a customer argument over a chair. She loved details. Now entire weekends came back hollow. Ethan listened, nodded, and felt the empty space open between her words. Jade began to notice. She did not accuse, but she watched. One evening, while Ethan washed dishes, she leaned against the doorway and said her mother seemed unusually happy lately. The comment landed softly but carried weight. Ethan smiled and said her mother deserved to be happy. Jade nodded, but her eyes lingered, uncertain. One night, Ethan made a video call, not out of suspicion but habit. He wanted to see her face. Say good night. Marissa answered amid warm lights and laughter. She said they were eating near the cabin but could not remember the restaurant's name. Her voice was a little too high, a little too quick. When the call ended, the house fell silent, and Ethan's stomach tightened. For the first time, he did not push the feeling away. He did not check her phone. He did not follow her. He did something else. He observed. He watched the rhythm of her absences. The gaps in communication. The delayed apologies. Sorry, I was in the shower. Sorry, bad signal. Sorry, we were in the hot tub. The apologies lined up, identical and empty. Then one evening, Ethan sat on the couch with the television muted. He opened social media. One of Marissa's coworkers posted photos from home. Kitchen lights on, children laughing. The date matched a retreat. Another checked in around Raleigh, only a few blocks away. Ethan glanced at the time. Marissa's text arrived saying she was out to dinner with the girls. The overlap was too precise to ignore. The feeling shifted. It was no longer instinct. It was incomplete truth. Ethan stood at the window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. He thought about the family stories people told each other. about how betrayal often begins when someone chooses silence to avoid conflict. He understood then that silence could be a blade. Marissa stepped out of the bedroom and asked if he was tired. Ethan said no. She mentioned another short trip coming up. He nodded. In her eyes, he was still predictable, easy, forgiving. In his mind, a door quietly closed. That night, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought of bridges he had inspected, of cracks that did not fail right away. They held until one day, under the wrong weight, everything gave way. He did not want to be that final step. He wanted to measure the load. When morning came, Ethan brewed coffee and left for work like any other day. Marissa slept peacefully beside him. He looked at her without anger, without tears, only clarity. Love does not die in a single moment. It erodes through stories that are never told. And from that moment on, Ethan stopped being the man who ignored the signs. He became the man who began collecting the truth. Slowly, carefully, without noise. The truth did not arrive with an explosion. It came like a cold report, line by line, leaving Ethan no room to deny it. That evening, he sat alone at the dining table, the overhead light casting a dull glow on the wood that had grown used to quiet meals. His phone lay in front of him, the screen lighting up and going dark again with the breathing of the house. Marissa texted to say she was having dinner with the girls, that the signal was bad, that she would be home late. Ethan read the message and set the phone down. He did not reply. He opened social media instead. He started with the names Marissa mentioned most often. One coworker posted a family dinner photo, a bright kitchen, a child laughing. Another shared a movie night at home in Raleigh. The timestamps matched Marissa's message perfectly. Ethan did not blink. He scrolled. Another day, another post. The same pattern repeating. The same timing too precise to be coincidence. Something clicked quietly into place in his mind. No sound, no warning, just alignment. He did not feel anger. The first emotion was relief. Relief that he was not imagining things. That he was not losing his grip on reality. He had not touched her phone. Had not followed her. Yet the data had walked into the light on its own. And data did not lie. He checked their shared expenses next. A charge from an upscale restaurant appeared on the same night she claimed to be at a retreat. Another from a downtown bar. Ethan remembered driving past that place countless times after work. He never went in. But someone had, and someone had used their card. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again with a single clear thought. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about evidence, and evidence needed to be handled the right way. Marissa came home late that night, apologetic, smiling lightly, offering a few clipped explanations. Ethan listened the way one listens to the weather, without reaction. In her mind, she still held control. She still saw him as predictable. Easy, overlooked. Ethan understood that this was his advantage. The next morning, he crossed paths with Jade in the kitchen. She asked if he was okay. Ethan nodded. Jade mentioned that her mother had been busy lately, her voice tired rather than accusing. Ethan placed his hand on the counter and said adults often make things more complicated than they need to be. Jade said nothing, but when she left the room, she turned back and quietly told him that if he ever needed someone to listen, she would. That afternoon, Ethan sat in his parked car, engine off, watching people pass by. He thought about his job, inspecting bridges, finding fractures, calculating risk, issuing recommendations. That work never allowed emotion to lead. It demanded precision. He decided his marriage deserved the same process. That night, he opened his laptop and typed words no husband ever wants to type. How to catch a cheating spouse. Page after page appeared. Red flags he already knew too well. Stories from men who sounded just like him. Some confronted. Some ignored it. Some wished they had known sooner. One term kept appearing. Private investigator. Ethan had always thought that was for movies or wealthy people. Not men like him. But the more he read, the clearer it became. This was not about spying. It was about certainty. He made several calls. Some voices sounded eager, almost theatrical. Then he reached a small office where a man spoke little and asked the right questions. Schedule, trips, gaps. Ethan answered plainly. When the call ended, he sat still for a long time. In the bedroom, Marissa slept peacefully, her face calm. Ethan looked at her without hatred. He thought of the years they had built, the dinners, the promises. He allowed himself a few breaths of sadness, then stood up. Outside, the city slept. The roads and bridges he inspected lay quiet. He recognized the feeling settling in his chest. The feeling before a report is filed, when everything is clear and the only thing left is to do the job correctly. From that moment on, Ethan stopped searching for answers. He began preparing for the truth, knowing it did not need him to shout in order to exist. The message arrived while Ethan was standing in the parking lot at the infrastructure office. Sweat still clinging to the back of his neck. Just 4 words. No punctuation. No emotion. She is not coming home. He stared at the phone, then at the road ahead of him. There was no thunder, no dizziness, only a heavy silence pressing into his chest. The same kind he felt when standing beneath a bridge and realizing a crack was no longer superficial. Graham, the investigator, did not elaborate. His voice was low and steady, trained to deliver bad news without decoration. Marissa left the showroom on time, did not go home, did not stop at a spa, but drove straight onto the highway and pulled into a roadside hotel Ethan had passed hundreds of times. The kind of place meant for meetings that were never meant to be seen. The photo came next. Marissa's car, the exact model, the exact color, the exact plate, parked under the harsh white glow of the hotel sign. Ethan zoomed in as if there were still a chance it was not hers. But data did not lie. He sat down on a concrete step, his back against a light pole. In that moment, he did not think about Marissa. He thought about himself, about years spent on the edge of rooms, about being called boring, about being underestimated because he was quiet. And he realized that being underestimated had given him an advantage no one saw coming. The days that followed felt like a test of endurance. Graham continued to watch. Some days Marissa went straight home, grocery shopping, living the routine of an ordinary wife. And for a brief moment Ethan wondered if he had been wrong. Hope flickered, then died. Then another message arrived. She is not coming home. This time, no photo was needed. Ethan already knew. When Graham asked him to come in, Ethan drove in a suspended state. The brick building sat tucked behind a convenience store, iron stairs rattling under his boots. Inside, the office was small, smelled of old coffee. Graham placed a thick folder on the desk. No drama, no apologies, just the truth organized neatly. Ethan opened it. The first photos showed the hotel parking lot. Then Marissa stood pressed against a man. Logan Price, her coworker, a man Ethan had once shaken hands with at a company event. The smile on Marissa's face was not one Ethan had seen in months. It was open, unguarded, belonging to a different life. More photos followed. The lobby, the elevator, different nights, different clothes, the same 2 bodies moving through the same script. Ethan turned the pages without shaking, without shouting. Something inside him did not break loudly. It simply went silent. Graham asked what he was going to do. The question hung in the air like a final calculation. Ethan closed the folder and answered slowly that he was done. No bargaining, no counseling, no apologies. She had made her choice. Now it was his turn. That night, Ethan went home like any other evening. Marissa sat on the couch, hair loosely tied, looking harmlessly tired. She asked about his day. He said it was fine. They went to bed. She curled against him, breathing evenly, as if he were still her safe place. Ethan stared at the ceiling and repeated one thought over and over. He was not a backup plan. He was not the man who paid the bills while someone else lived a secret life. The next morning, after Marissa left with a quick kiss, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen with his hand on the cold counter. He thought of bridges that had to be closed before they killed anyone. From that moment on, Ethan stopped waiting. He began to act, quietly, methodically, knowing that real power lived in planning, not noise. Ethan signed his name without his hand shaking, as if he were completing a routine inspection report rather than preparing to end his marriage. The law office sat quietly on the second floor of a glass building. Bright lights, black leather chairs, the clean scent of new paper. Nina Hart sat across from him, thin framed glasses resting low on her nose. She did not ask if he was okay. She asked what he wanted to protect. The question was sharp and precise. Ethan answered after a single breath. His future. Nina read through Graham's file like a blueprint. Page by page. No sighs. No expressions. When she looked up, her voice was steady and cold. Infidelity did not automatically decide everything, but it destroyed claims built on emotion. With this evidence, Marissa could not blow up his life and still expect to be paid for the damage. For the first time since the hotel photos, Ethan felt something solid under his feet. Nina laid out the rules. No large transfers. Do not touch retirement accounts. Document every expense. Separate finances cleanly. No confrontation. No emotional outbursts. Ethan nodded. He understood process. You do not yell at a failing bridge. You isolate it and protect the people crossing it. That afternoon, Ethan drove to a bank branch across town. Not the one Marissa used. A small office. A fake plant in the corner. He opened a new account in his name only. No shared access. No extra card. Signing the paperwork felt like loosening a rope from his neck. He called Human Resources next. Asked to reroute his direct deposit. The woman asked if everything was all right. He said yes, just personal changes. A few keystrokes later, his paycheck was no longer flowing into the same pool. That was the day he stopped funding his own betrayal. That evening, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and his phone. One by one, he called the credit card companies, verified his identity, answered security questions he had forgotten he ever set, then repeated the same sentence calmly each time. I need to remove an authorized user. With every call that ended, another door closed. No more dinners paid for with his overtime. No more shopping trips disguised as exhaustion. He changed the beneficiaries on his insurance policies. From Marissa's name to his sister's. Saying the word wife felt wrong in his mouth, but he said it anyway. Then corrected it. When the last call ended, he sat in the quiet kitchen and spoke out loud. She does not get to destroy my life and live off it. There was one thing he could not cut cleanly. The SUV Marissa drove. Both names were on the title, but Ethan had made every payment for 3 years. He called the finance company during a break and asked about transferring the loan. The answer was polite and firm. Not without her signature, and missed payments would damage both credit reports. Ethan hung up with the kind of anger that comes from paperwork. Realizing his options were to keep paying for the car she used to see another man or burn his own credit out of spite. He told Nina. She did not hesitate. Keep paying the minimum, she said, and document every payment, dates and amounts. We will make the judge see it. So Ethan did. Month after month, he paid, and month after month, he added another line to a debt Marissa did not yet know she would owe. At home, Marissa continued playing her familiar role, complaining of fatigue, talking about work, leaning into Ethan like habit itself would hold her up. In her mind, he was still the quiet man who would do nothing. In his, the map was nearly complete. Jade noticed the change. One evening she asked if he was angry at her mother. Ethan looked at her and said the truth. He was not angry. He was protecting himself. Jade nodded slowly, seeing him differently for the first time. Not just as her mother's husband, but as a man with boundaries. The night before Marissa's next long trip, Ethan lay staring at the ceiling. No longer in pain, only focused. He knew that trip would be the turning point. Not because of where she was going, but because while she was gone, he would dismantle the life built on lies. Ethan was not chasing loud revenge. He was pursuing fairness, and fairness, he knew, always belonged to those who were patient, precise, and willing to act quietly. The laughter spilled out from the phone lying face down on the table. And just one sentence slipping through was enough for Ethan to realize he had been dragged onto a stage he never agreed to step on. It was the night of Marissa's company dinner. She said it was just an internal meal. A few managers getting together. No need to bring spouses. Her tone was soft and familiar. The same as every explanation before. Ethan nodded. He stood in the kitchen watching her adjust her hair. Slip into a dress fitted a little too perfectly for a simple dinner. She kissed his cheek, the scent of new perfume lingering. Then the door closed and the house went quiet. Ethan did not go to bed early. He sat in the living room with the lights off, letting the streetlight spill through the window. He was not waiting for a message. He was past that stage. But the phone still rang. The caller was one of Marissa's former coworkers. Someone who had always been polite to Ethan at the rare gatherings. The voice on the other end hesitated, caught between silence and conscience. Then finally spoke. At the dinner, Logan Price had raised his glass, laughed loudly, looked around the table and said what sounded like a joke. "How does it feel?" The table laughed. Marissa laughed too. She did not look down. She did not stop it. Ethan did not ask for details. He did not need them. He set the phone down. His chest did not tighten. His heart did not race. What settled in was a cold clarity. This was not just infidelity. This was humiliation, deliberate and shared, a game in which he had been chosen as the absent fool. In that elegant restaurant, Marissa sat with her back straight under warm lights, Logan leaning close to her ear, her laughter easy and unguarded. To her, it was validation. To Logan, it was power. To everyone else, it was a side story to repeat later. No one thought about the man sitting in a dark house, underestimated because of his silence. Ethan stood and stepped into the backyard. The night air was cool, the grass damp with dew. He thought about his work, about inspections that measured not just materials but human arrogance. Bridges did not collapse because of malice. They collapsed because someone believed they never would. His phone vibrated again, a message from Marissa saying the dinner was fun and she would be home late. She did not mention Logan. She did not mention the laughter. Ethan read it and did not reply. He slipped the phone into his pocket. In his mind, the decision was complete. Marissa came home close to midnight, set her shoes neatly by the door, moved quietly. She saw Ethan still awake and offered a few scattered comments about work and upcoming plans. Ethan listened and nodded. In her eyes, he was still the same man. Gentle, unquestioning, safe. She did not know that somewhere else, the map had already been drawn. The next morning, Ethan drove to work as usual. He passed the building where Marissa's company offices were located. Just one extra turn of the wheel. Just one look. He saw people walking in, laughing, carrying stories he no longer belonged to. He felt no sadness, only lightness. At midday, he met Nina and told her about the dinner, about the sentence, about the laughter. Nina was not surprised. She told him this was the moment to stay disciplined. Do not react. Do not let them know what you know. Your power is in silence. Ethan nodded. He understood. That evening, Jade came home and asked if her mother had enjoyed herself. Marissa said yes. Jade looked at Ethan. Their eyes met for a brief second. He said nothing, but Jade saw the change. A new steadiness in his posture. A calm that was no longer naive. That night, Ethan packed a small bag. Important documents. A few clothes. Not to leave yet, just to be ready. He placed it in the trunk and closed it gently. It was a small act, but it carried the weight of a final decision. In the bedroom, Marissa slept peacefully, unaware that the dinner had not been a climax but a mistake. It had pushed Ethan past the last boundary. Not the boundary of anger, but the boundary of permission. From the moment Logan laughed and asked how does it feel, Ethan already had his answer. It felt like freedom moving closer. And freedom, he knew, always begins when you step away from places where people expect you to stay silent. That morning, Marissa left the house with a suitcase lighter than the lies she carried. And Ethan knew the moment he had been waiting for had arrived. She adjusted her hair in the mirror, her voice soft as always, talking about a few days away to take care of a friend. To clear her head, to reset. Ethan nodded, lifted the suitcase, and set it into the trunk. He told her to text when she arrived. She promised. The kiss she placed on his cheek landed in the same familiar spot. Practiced and empty. As the car rolled out of the driveway, Ethan stood still, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. There was no longing, no hesitation, only a straight line opening in front of him. When the gate closed, he pulled his phone from his pocket and called Nina. His voice was so calm it surprised even him. He said he could not stay in that house anymore, that it was contaminated. On the other end, Nina did not ask why. She said then we dismantle it by law. She promised to file immediately, to request a court order to deal with the marital property and force the sale of the house. Ethan thanked her and ended the call. A decision had just been signed with his voice. The house fell silent. Ethan moved from room to room without letting memory slow him down. He gathered important documents, a few sets of clothes, the photographs that still held meaning. He packed them into boxes, labeled neatly. Every movement had rhythm, like dismantling a dangerous structure to protect those around it. He did not destroy, he dismantled. That afternoon, Ethan met Samantha Reed, a local real estate agent. She arrived on time, blazer crisp, eyes professional. They walked through each room. She measured, took notes, snapped photos. She said the neighborhood was good, the market strong, the house would draw interest quickly. At the dining table, she paused and gently asked why he was selling. Ethan did not dodge it. He said one word, divorce. Samantha nodded without pity or curiosity, typed into her tablet, and moved on. The honesty made him feel lighter. They agreed on the price, signed the papers, and set the date for the sign to go up. When Samantha left, Ethan stood on the front porch looking at the lawn. He pictured where the sign would stand, how the wind would move it, not to cause pain, but to end something. His phone buzzed. Marissa texted that she had arrived safely. Tired but fine. Ethan replied with one word. Good. Nothing more. While she closed the door on another room somewhere else, he was opening an exit for himself. 2 days later, Nina called back, her voice firm. The judge has signed. We have the order. Ethan received the email, opened the file, and read every line of dry legal language. The case number, their names, the checked boxes, the signature, just a few thin pages, but enough to turn a home into an asset to be sold. He printed them and set them on the table. It did not feel like victory. It felt like a necessary ending. The next morning, a white SUV with the brokerage logo pulled up. A man stepped out carrying a post and metal frame. Ethan watched from behind the window as the stake was driven into the ground. The frame assembled, the sign mounted. Each push was an answer to the nights he had questioned his own sanity. When the vehicle left, Ethan stepped outside and stood in front of the sign. Simple, clear, no explanation needed. He went back inside, opened windows to let the air move, and continued packing, moving boxes to storage, leaving just enough behind so the house still looked lived in. He was not hiding, he was preparing. That evening, Marissa called and mentioned a neighbor asking questions. She laughed and said it must be a mistake. Ethan listened and did not correct her. Not yet. Night fell, and Ethan sat in the living room with a book open, eyes not reading. He thought about bridges closed before they collapse. People hate detours. They do not see the cracks, only the inconvenience. But the one responsible chooses safety. Outside, the sign stood under the streetlight. Ethan knew when Marissa returned, it would be the first thing she saw. And when that moment came, he would not argue. He would inform, calmly and clearly. She had left to find peace. He had stayed to end a lie. And from the moment the stake hit the ground, the story had changed direction. This was no longer about where she went or with whom. It was about who had the right to decide his own life. The door flew open and Marissa's scream tore through the house before she even set the suitcase down. She froze in the entryway, staring out at the yard where the for sale sign swayed as if it had been waiting for her eyes. Ethan sat in the living room with a book open in his hands. He heard the suitcase wheels scrape across the floor, heard Marissa's breath come fast, sharp with anger and disbelief. She stormed in, her voice rising as she demanded what the sign was doing there and who gave him the right. Ethan closed the book slowly, as if finishing a chapter, then looked up at her without flinching. He said he had not done it alone, that the court had signed, that the house was being sold because they were divorced. Silence dropped hard, not the calm kind, but the hollow space left when a pillar is pulled away. Marissa let out a short, brittle laugh, insisting it had to be a joke. Ethan stood. He said it was not a joke. The papers were already filed. She would be served within the week. Her hands tightened on the suitcase handle as the color drained from her face. She spoke fast, stacking words on top of each other. Saying he could not do this. Saying it was their house. Saying he had to talk to her first. Ethan let the words run into the wall of reality. Then he walked into the kitchen, returned with a thick folder, and placed it on the table. He told her to open it. She stared at the folder as if it might explode. Then did. The first photo slowed her eyes. The second pulled her mouth open. By the third, the color had fully left her face. Hotel signs, parking lots, hands at a lower back. Moments she believed were private now flattened into paper with dates and times. She said it was not what it looked like. Her voice cracking. Ethan gave a short laugh with no warmth and said there was no need to imagine. These were choices. She broke down, covering her face, stepping toward him as if habit might still hold. Ethan stepped back. The small distance became a new boundary. Tears could not erase data. She begged, spoke of counseling, of starting over, of nights he worked late. Ethan raised a hand and said no. She had made her choice and now she would live with it. His voice stayed even. He told her he had removed her from all credit cards, that she was no longer an authorized user. He said he had changed the beneficiaries on his insurance. Her name replaced. He added that every payment on the car she drove had been documented and the court would require her to reimburse her share. Each sentence tightened another bolt. The tears stopped abruptly. Fear showed, raw and unmasked. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. The quiet man who had built a system in the dark and just closed it. Her tone shifted to anger, to threats, saying she would tell a different story, paint him as cold and neglectful. Ethan listened and nodded once, saying she had the right to tell stories. But he had the truth. Jade appeared at the end of the hallway, frozen, watching. Ethan lowered his voice and told her this was not her fault. Jade nodded, tears bright but unfallen, seeing the line drawn clearly for the first time. Marissa sank into a chair, clutching her head. The house seemed to shrink. Ethan turned to the window and looked at the sign outside. It was not cruel. It was honest. When he turned back, his voice slowed. He said he was not doing this to hurt her. He was doing it to stop being hurt. Outside, traffic passed like any other day. Inside, the ending arrived without an explosion, carried by a decision that had already settled. Marissa understood she had not come home to a marriage. She had come home to a verdict. And Ethan understood that from this moment on, he did not need to explain his choice to anyone. By the next morning, Ethan had already become the villain in a story he did not write. The whispers spread before the sun was fully up. A friend at the grocery store avoiding his eyes. A neighbor making a casual remark about how hard marriage can be when one person emotionally checks out. Marissa did not stay silent. She moved fast, planting her version everywhere, painting herself as the woman abandoned by a cold husband, the one pushed into someone else's arms, the victim forced into choices she never wanted. Ethan felt it not through direct confrontation but through pauses in greetings, through hesitations in messages, through looks that slid away at the last second. The narrative had a familiar rhythm. Tears, soft language, half-truths, and a conveniently absent man to carry the blame. That evening, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, the same folder resting in front of him. He turned the pages slowly, refusing to let emotion lead. He thought about his work, about how a distorted technical report does not fail immediately but collapses later when someone trusts the wrong drawing. He understood that silence would turn him into that drawing. His phone buzzed with a blunt question from an old friend asking if there was more to the story. Ethan did not take offense. He replied simply that there was, and he would speak when it mattered. The next day, he called Graham, not for more surveillance but for everything in digital form. Photos, timestamps, locations, the full timeline. Graham sent it without commentary. Ethan forwarded it to Nina, who reviewed it and confirmed it was clean. That night, Ethan opened his laptop and built a document with no insults and no emotion. Only facts. Page 1 listed the dates Marissa said she was on retreats. Beside each date were the times and locations Graham had recorded. Hotels, restaurants, parking lots. He attached photos, blurring faces and license plates. He was not seeking revenge, only accuracy. Jade stood behind him for a moment, watching the screen. She said her mother was talking a lot, changing details, reshaping the past. Ethan told her she did not need to choose sides, that the truth would stand on its own. Jade nodded, exhausted rather than angry. When the document was finished, Ethan emailed it to his family, to her family, to close friends, and to a few people who had already heard the accusations. He added one line, "This is the truth, nothing more, nothing less." He also posted a redacted version online. Not to provoke, not to plead, just to place light where there had been shadow. The response came in waves. The first was silence. The vague posts about healing and toxic relationships disappeared. The second wave was private messages. Apologies. Admissions of doubt. Ethan replied politely and briefly. He was not collecting victories. Marissa called, furious, accusing him of humiliation and defamation. Ethan listened and said calmly that truth does not defame. It ends performances. She hung up. In the days that followed, Ethan went back to work. Standing beneath bridges, studying joints and seams, he saw the parallel clearly. When light hits a crack, it is not punishment, it is protection. A friend who had questioned him earlier called to apologize. Ethan accepted it and moved on. That evening, he returned to the house that was about to be sold, opened the windows, and let the air pass through. Outside, the sign stood still. Inside, the story had turned, not because he raised his voice, but because he refused to stay silent. In battles of narrative, the winner is not the loudest voice, but the one who keeps the truth intact. When the truth stands, every role built on lies collapses on its own. The house did not stay on the market for long. Showings began almost immediately, strangers walking through rooms that still held echoes of arguments and laughter. Pointing at windows, measuring walls, imagining futures that no longer included Ethan or Marissa. Ethan stayed out of the way. Sometimes sitting in his truck at the curb, sometimes watching from a distance as couples drifted through the yard, pausing near the sign, talking about schools and commute times. He felt a strange mix of loss and relief, like watching a structure finally be cleared after years of hidden damage. One afternoon, a young couple came by with an agent. They moved slowly, careful, the woman resting a hand on her stomach as they talked about where a crib might go. How the smallest bedroom could become a nursery. Ethan looked away. That house had held the worst betrayal of his life. But to them it was only a beginning. When their offer came in, it was clean and fair. Ethan accepted without hesitation. The closing process was quiet and procedural. Signatures, initials, numbers moving across screens. When it was done, the mortgage was paid off and there was equity left. By law, half of it went to Marissa. People asked Ethan later if that bothered him, if he felt cheated one last time. Of course it did, but fairness mattered more than bitterness. He signed and let the money go. He did not want revenge so badly that he would have to lose himself to get it. The final hearing took place in a plain courtroom. Hard benches, cold air, a judge who had seen hundreds of endings just like this one. Ethan sat beside Nina, calm, composed. Marissa sat across the room with her attorney. Shoulders tight, eyes hollow. Nina presented the evidence without drama. The trips, the dates, the financial records, the car payments Ethan had carried alone. Marissa's lawyer spoke about lifestyle and need, about how difficult it would be for her without support. The judge listened, then ruled with clarity. No alimony. Given the evidence, spousal support was denied. The court also ordered Marissa to reimburse Ethan for her share of the car payments he had made over the years. It was not triumph, it was balance. When the hearing ended, Ethan walked out into daylight feeling lighter. Not happy, but aligned. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment near his work. Beige walls, worn carpet, nothing special, but free of ghosts. He returned to the gym, lifted weights, rebuilt strength he had let slip away. He went fishing early on weekends, drove long roads without destinations, watched games without checking his phone. Life became quieter, smaller, and honest. Months later, a plain envelope appeared in his mailbox. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a long letter from Marissa. Apologies layered on regrets, declarations of love, requests for one last conversation. For closure, Ethan read it all in his truck, engine running. When he finished, he folded the pages, then tore them into pieces, smaller than necessary, and dropped them into the dumpster. He did not feel anger. He felt finished. He used to think betrayal like this would destroy him. It did not. It stripped everything down to truth. Love without trust, he learned, is just a word, and sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you is the door opening to the life you should have been living all along. Time passed, and with it the noise faded. Ethan settled into a rhythm that no longer revolved around explanations or defense. His days became simple: work in the morning, quiet evenings, weekends that belonged to him alone. He spoke less about the past, not because it still hurt, but because it no longer needed words. Friends who had once doubted him slowly returned to normal conversation. Sports, work, ordinary life. Some apologized directly, others simply acted as if nothing had happened. Ethan accepted both. He understood that people often choose the easiest story first and only look deeper when forced to. He did not hold grudges. He had learned that carrying resentment was just another way of staying tied to what had already ended. Jade stayed in touch. She called occasionally, not to talk about her mother, but about her own life, school, plans, frustrations. Ethan listened the way he always had, steady and present. She once told him that seeing how he handled everything had changed the way she thought about strength. He thanked her quietly and changed the subject, but the words stayed with him. At work, Ethan was offered a lead role on a long-term inspection project. More responsibility, more trust. The same qualities people once mistook for weakness had become visible as reliability. He accepted the role without ceremony. He knew now that power did not announce itself. It proved itself over time. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan thought about the house, the sign in the yard, the moment Marissa stepped out of the car and realized her safety net was gone. He did not replay it with satisfaction, but with clarity. That moment had not been revenge. It had been a boundary. He understood something he had never fully grasped before. Ending something toxic is not cruelty. It is self-respect. He also understood that silence is not always passive. Sometimes it is preparation. The world had not ended when his marriage did. It had narrowed, sharpened, and then opened again in a different direction. Ethan no longer needed to be right in the eyes of everyone. He only needed to be right with himself. And in that quiet certainty, he found something stronger than anger or vindication. He found peace built on truth, not illusion. Ethan sometimes thought back to the moment Marissa pulled into the driveway and saw the for sale sign standing in the yard. Red and white against the grass like a sentence already finished. To her, it meant losing a house, losing comfort, losing the man who had quietly carried the weight of her life while she chased something else. To him, it meant something very different. It meant he was no longer going to live inside a story built on lies. It meant he was done wondering where his wife really was or who she was laughing with when she said she was tired. That simple piece of plastic in the ground had been the first honest thing in front of that house in a long time. The betrayal did not destroy him. It stripped him down. It taught him that love without trust is empty. That silence can be strength when it is chosen. And that walking away is not weakness when staying means erasing yourself. Ethan learned that sometimes the worst moment of your life is only the doorway to something better. A life that belongs to you alone. Built on truth instead of performance. If you have ever been lied to, cheated on, or made to feel crazy for noticing the cracks, know this: you are not wrong, and you are not alone. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to start over. And if this story spoke to you, share your thoughts, leave a comment, and stay with us for more stories like this. Because sometimes hearing the truth out loud is the first step toward finding your own way forward.